It needs a little work.
I'm going to go through some BMW N54 19T upgrades that you commonly see on eBay. These are really cheaply priced. I've had a lot of people ask me about going through a set, inspecting them, seeing the quality inside to see if they'll last, and to go back and balance them. Well, I'll show you a couple things here just to kind of educate you so you know what you're buying. And I'm also curious what kind of quality are in these myself. I've seen these online. It's a very good price to buy them at, but there's a couple things that I think that you should probably consider when you're buying these to know what you're getting. Here's a set that you commonly see on eBay if you've seen them. They got 19T compressor wheels. I was kind of disappointing in the turbine wheels. They're actually kind of small. The turbines are only TD04Ls, so they're only 41 millimeter. Compressor wheels, I haven't measured them, but they should be about 46 millimeter, which is kind of big for that turbine. Here's a cartridge here. I don't know if the sellers are the same. The cartridge, the thing I like about that is the blade is extended, so it looks like it's a pretty good quality compressor wheel. The turbine, it's a 9-blade TD04L turbine, 41 millimeter. The biggest you can get is a 45.6 TD04HL. I really don't like these exhaust housings. It's just because these are cast iron. The OEM ones are stainless steel, so the stainless steel ones are never going to crack, and even if they do, it really isn't going to cause that many issues. I've seen a ton or a bunch of BMW N54 turbos, and it is extremely rare that they ever crack. And you know, the wastegate repair, that's a very common thing that needs to be replaced. So these turbine housings are likely not going to last you as long as an OEM one will. This does have the bigger piece here. I've since converted all the ones that we sell over to that too. I don't really think that it matters, but people commonly want that to have the bigger diameter piece here rather than the smaller one. The flaps are welded. That's a plus. I noticed later on after doing several of them that if this wasn't welded, sometimes the valve could separate from the washer there. And on my car, I never welded mine, and I've had my car running with the turbos for 3 years, 15,000 miles, and as far as I know, the flaps are still connected. If that comes loose, then it's not going to boost, so it's really important that that's done. I was curious if these are even what they say they are. So I was getting about 45 millimeter on these. It's hard to measure this style wheel because the blades aren't exactly all the way across. I can measure a compressor housing. We can confirm what size that compressor wheel is that way. You could check to see that it was balanced right there. It's got a balancing mark. This means that this whole assembly was balanced as an assembly. And the way that works is this piece will get balanced first as a component. This will be balanced as a component, which is fine on most turbos. And then they went the extra mile, put the turbo together, and then put it on a like a VSR balancer and balanced it on the compressor nut to make sure the whole cartridge was balanced together. Most turbos don't require that to be done. This should be left-hand thread, so I should be able to turn it right and it should loosen up. If you do take one of these apart, just make sure you mark it before you do that. I already marked this one, so I marked it on the nut, the compressor wheel, and the shaft with a file so that I can put it back where it was originally before taking it apart. So those are TD04 bearings, and a TD04 rear seal, and a TD04 shaft bore. On the Hexon models, it was like a very strange hybrid which used the outside diameter the same as TD03 bearings. So this one is kind of like a revised. It's basically the way it should have been as a TD04. The Hexon was a TD03, just converted over with the turbine shaft made to be TD04 and TD04 compressor wheel. These parts, like, so this is all TD04. The TD03 plate will slip down in here, and the collar could interchange. So that's why you can take a TD03 and convert it to TD04. That's not upgraded right there. So that's going to cause problems, which means that this thrust bearing is likely not upgraded. The collar is likely not upgraded, and the bearing housing probably is not machined, the bigger collar. Yep, that's not upgraded. So this turbo would have failed. Hey, that's good. The bearing housing is already machined for the larger collar, so you guys are in luck. Here's the upgraded parts you need to make this turbo reliable. This has the 2 oil port thrust bearing right there. And if you have a reverse version, which these are all forward, anyway, the reverse version will have an opposite pattern of this. So you have to make sure you buy the correct kit. I'll also make an eBay listing so that you guys can buy this, and if you just want to buy just these 3 parts, I'll have that option available so that you don't have to buy the entire rebuild kit if you're just trying to correct one of these. If you want to buy the rebuild kit, if you've had these turbos on the car and they had problems, here's the whole rebuild kit here. I'll leave a link to the rebuild kit you need because it's not going to be the same as TD04. It's going to be slightly revised, so you'll need a different compressor O-ring. So I'll make a separate listing for that, so you have the correct parts that you need. So the difference here with these pieces, this has a wider collar, or this is a collar. It has a wider collar. The back has 100% of the ground on the thrust bearing, so it doesn't have that bevel there is what I'm trying to say. And then this piece, it's got a 14 millimeter diameter, so it has more surface area on, it goes the other way actually. It has more surface area on the bearing, which gives it more durability. So you're never going to have a problem with this failing, but if you leave this in there, then this turbo will fail above the 20 psi range. You may not have any problems below that range, but I wouldn't run any more than 18 just because I've had the same experience with the turbo upgrades that I do. So I had to come up with an upgrade kit for the TD03s, which has been working very well. These are a stock set that I upgrade. So this is the whole turbo is an original turbo, and then I upgrade the compressors. So those are only 39.6, but those are really good turbos. They're still good for over 500 horsepower. Someone told me they're good for 600, but I had somebody make 580 at 24 pounds. But these turbos are basically in your 600 to 700 horsepower range. I grabbed a bearing out of the TD04 rebuild kit just to show you that the sizes are the same. We can also mic this. I put it inside the bearing housing to check that too. So the fitment looks good. But let's check it with a mic to see what it comes out to. .91, and these calipers could be off a little bit because I use these every day for machining stuff, but I'm usually taking relative measurements, so I can kind of afford that tolerance. Okay, so you just saw what we got off of the measurements from my bearing, and this is the one that came out of it. So it looks good. So I'd give them some credit on that. Here's the front parts. This is not staggered, but I've never seen one for this model that would be. So there's your balancing marks. Over here. The main concern I have is how sharp these edges are right here. They never deburred them. There's a really good deburr tool that I use. This has an extendable handle here, so you can extend this out to reach corners. This piece right here can be taken out of here and flipped in sideways. I'll link to this in the description. I use this tool every day on exhaust housings. I also use it on compressor housings too. I machine something that commonly needs to be deburred, and this is the tool that I go to do that. Kind of hard for me to hold the phone and do this, but you can kind of see how that works. There's also an edge on the far back side there where I could flip this piece around so it'd be sideways, and I can go back and scrape that and round it too. This is really important because if you don't do that, then it can crack, and is very likely to crack on all those sharp edges. I'll show you a good example of an exhaust housing that was not deburred and ends up cracking. This is a Cummins 5.9 turbo from a 2001 model. You can see it's got a crack right there. I've already machined this for the turbine wheel, so I did a 64 turbine, but these are not deburred from the factory, so this area right here is really sharp. But I used that deburr tool and was able to round those out. If this was done when leaving the factory, this housing likely would have never cracked in those areas, but you can see how smooth it is on that edge where I deburred it. It's very sharp on the end of the bearing housing heat shield area right there, and on this radius it's got very sharp edges. So I'd recommend deburring those. I guess all the ones that come in, I'm going to feel like I'm obligated to deburr them, but it won't really be that hard to do that. You can see that they already deburred the top here, so it's like they deburred everything that you can see, but anything that you can't see, they didn't care to deburr that. This part's easier with a Dremel tool.